And we are now recording. So, nothing major due this week. You guys should be working on your outline. Is everybody working on their outline? And you guys understand what I'm looking for in your outline?
It's similar to what I had for last year.
Yeah. Just an alphanumeric outline, giving you the introduction, the points that are going to be covered in the introduction, each body paragraph, the title of that, or the thesis statement for each of those, and any body support, all in bullets or alphanumeric bullets, and then your conclusion, and then the main points that you're going there. You do not have to follow that outline. You're writing your paper. You can change your outline, you can update your outline, you can do all of the fun things that come with outlines, because as you continue your research, you're going to learn more about your topic, and you're going to want to make changes. The outline is a roadmap. Excuse me. It is a roadmap for the completion of your paper. If you want to change part of that roadmap, it's like GPS, you know. She has to reroute you because you didn't turn left, right? Or if you find that you want to go in a different direction, you can update the outline. You don't need to turn it back into me if you update it throughout the semester, but this is the intent of the outline is so that you can start thinking about how you want your paper to go. You should be reading, you should have all a minimum of 6 sources already found. If not, you know what your homework is for the week, to find the sources for your paper. You need at least 6 sources. I'll cover those again. One of them must be a journal article that can be found through the library database. One must be a book. You could even use your textbook for the class. One must be an authorized, accepted website. But what is not accepted as a source? Wikipedia. What will happen to you if you use Wikipedia on anything that you turn into me? You will get a 0 on your paper. Is Wikipedia a good place to start doing your research? Why, Jake? Go to the bottom of the page and find their sources and see if they apply to what you need. Normally, I go into Wikipedia and I make some changes to it in front of you to show you that Wikipedia is horrible, and I'll probably do that later in the semester when we get a little closer, when you're working on your annotated bibliography. And Jacob saw it last year in research class. I'll go into, if you search John Fisher and go to the Wikipedia page, I'm not going to pop up there. Saint John Fisher is going to pop up there. How many Catholics are in the room? Who is Saint John Fisher? I know there's so many saints in the Catholic Church. What's just one more? John Fisher was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He fought against Henry VIII. When Henry VIII took England out of the church, out of the Catholic Church, and he started the Church of England. John Fisher fought against him, and Henry VIII took his head. And the Pope at the time turned John Fisher into a saint. So you look at that, and you'll go through there, and you'll read, and you'll learn all this information about Saint John Fisher. And then at the bottom it says execution and something, conclusions. So it talks about how he died and all of that fun stuff. And then I'll put in there in the very last sentence, I'll put in St. John Fisher now teaches criminal justice at the University of Texas Permian Basin. And I'll hit send. And then I'll close Wikipedia. And I'll open it back up again, and we'll go to the page. And we'll go all the way to the bottom. And at the end, the last sentence, it says, St. John Fisher now teaches criminal justice at the University of Texas Permian Basin. And then I'll go to the Hells Angels page. And the hell that describes who the Hells Angels are and what the Hells Angels do. And it's not very politically polite or correct, and it does offend the LGBTQI plus P community. But I put the Hells Angels are a group of quote unquote flaming homosexuals that wear pantsless chaps riding around on motorcycles. And then I'll hit save, and then I'll close it, and I'll open up another browser, and I'll go back to it, and it'll still be there. And it'll stay there until the editors from Wikipedia delete it. So it could be there for 10 minutes, it could be there for 2 hours, it could be there for 2 months, it could be there forever. At this point, I think Wikipedia knows that I do this at least once a year. So it stays about 5 hours and then it gets taken down. I use it as a point of reference to say, hey, Wikipedia is not a very good source because anybody can edit it and make it say anything that it wants to say. But at the bottom of the page for Wikipedia, it gives you real sources. And then you could go to those real sources and see if they're applicable to your research and what you're trying to do. So, enough on that. Today, we're going to be talking about retribution, religion, and capital punishment. I am not attempting to impose my faith or anybody else's faith upon you at this venture. Religion is an issue when it comes to the death penalty. So, we're going to discuss it. But let's first start with defining retribution. And retribution is the primary basis for the support of the death penalty in the United States. It's a concept of retribution is also not very precise, or it's imprecise. Retribution equals revenge, does it? Is retribution vengeance? Also known as just desserts. And that's what we're looking at. It's a payback to the criminal. Now, it's punishment that is attributed to the criminal for crimes against society. And the public supports this vindictive revenge. It goes back to Hammurabi. Now, I know everybody thinks that this concept is something that comes from Moses and the Old Testament and them stinking Jews. But it actually comes from Hammurabi. And who is Hammurabi?
Hammurabi's code is, I forgot where it was within the federal president.
That's what Dallas said, the Babylonian Empire. He is the first person to codify law. And you'll need to know this for your intro class. Hammurabi is the first to codify the law. And in addition with codifying the law, he established punishment. And the punishment that Hammurabi set forth was an eye for an eye, a tooth for tooth, stripe for stripe. I know we've covered this. I know. I don't know if I've covered it in this class, but I've covered it in just about every class. Okay. And this thought of retribution, this thought of revenge, dates all the way back to the first criminal justice system underneath Hammurabi. So, the sources of retribution. There's a biological basis. And what does that mean? Well, how do you figure out, or how do you determine that there is a biological basis for retribution? You know the book for your reading list. It is called The Limits of Criminal Sanction. It is by Herbert L. Packer. It's available on Amazon for $23.95. But when you get the book, you're going to open up the front cover, and it's going to say $8.95. This book was actually written in the 1960s, but it's still prevalent, it is still necessary for today. And if you participated or if you watched my victimology lecture today, I read a little bit about out of that book. I talked a little bit about the desire for punishment. Why is the desire for punishment biological, or how do they link retribution to biology? Anybody? Jacob?
I mean, simple survival. You know, if someone hits you, you want to hit them back because it's like a survival instinct, you know, fight or flight. You will not want
Rage. Four-letter word, rage. And I'll just, pull out my race card again. I have one available. You call me a kike, I'm going to break your nose. I'll use the word kike because I can, because I am Jewish. But if you call me a kike, I'm going to break your nose. It's vengeance. It creates, biologically, when we become victims of crime, or our family members become victims of crime, there is this biological need for vengeance. And if you do not have control over that biological need, then we start blood feuds. Yes, I won't even let another Jew call me a kike. I'll break both of his noses. Well, the joke, big noses, never mind. We have this desire, this biological need for vengeance. And so this is the source of retribution. The second source of retribution is a result of socialization, and the process of socialization. If we believe in the death penalty and we want the death penalty to be applied to individuals for committing certain offenses, we expect that punishment. Once we give our freedom of vengeance, our right to vengeance to the government, we expect the government to obtain and to find that vengeance. That's the only reason why the government is in charge of punishment. Because if you leave it up to me, you won't like your outcome. Because I'm a hammer-on-me kind of guy. I'm an old Roman Empire kind of guy. You violate me and you turn me into a victim, I will execute your ass. That's the way that it was in Rome. That was the way that it was all the way up until Caesar Beccaria. Every crime was punishable by death. We gave that right, we gave that freedom away, and we gave it to the government as part of our socialization process. And we agree as a society what the punishment should be for the specific classes, what the punishment should be for the different classes of crime. You get busted with 3 ounces of marijuana, what should be your punishment? We're all Texans, so we should all have the same answer, right? What's the punishment for possession of marijuana? 3 ounces is a misdemeanor. That's almost personal use. Has to be over 4 ounces or 6 ounces of marijuana in order for it to be distribution. Methamphetamines and cocaine, it's anything over 4 grams, is considered intent to distribute. But what's the common socialized punishment for your first time offense of possession of marijuana? There's a fine, maybe probation. What about for your first felony possession of drugs and narcotics? You're arrested. Well, everybody's arrested if you break the law, but prison. And we accept that. Now looking at the death penalty, as Texans, I guess I'm making a big assumption here. Is everybody from Texas? Well, let me rephrase, who's not from Texas? You're from Nevada? Nevada has the death penalty. Where in Nevada? Las Vegas. I went there once. Left my shirt there. And everything else I own. Lost my shirt and all my money. What do we expect? Or what is an acceptable punishment for the death penalty to be applied in the state of Texas? It says that we're socialized into accepting the death penalty. Retribution and revenge, there are two sources. The first is biological, which is rage and anger. The second is socialization. And that we're socialized to accept these punishments. So if we're socialized to accept these punishments in the state of Texas, where do we say, yes, that's deserving of the death penalty? When you kill someone else. I know there are a few people in the state of Texas that would like that offense extended to pedophilia. And that's what the plus P is, by the way. If you wondered, as I go with all of the LGBTQQII plus P. Because the P says they're born that way, they don't have a choice. And they're just acting out on who they love and what they love. And they want to be included in the LGBTQQII plus community. I said string them up, father testicle. But I'm socialized into that, right? Because I have no anger, I have no rage against pedophiles. And I have absolutely no problems with adding them to the rest of the LGBTQII community. So what are the problems that we have with retribution and revenge? Well, rage is an emotion. It's an understandable reaction. It's an understandable desire. It's understandable. We can comprehend somebody being angry. We can comprehend the rage and the vengeance and the desire to get even. But it's emotional. And emotions have absolutely no place in criminal justice. We should be Vulcans. Logic and science should dictate our decisions when it comes to punishment, not emotion, not the way that we feel about things. Should be based on reason. Now, revenge can be served by non-capital punishments. You don't have to have the death penalty to get revenge. You can be incapacitated for the rest of your life. And does that mean that you're taken care of? Does that mean that you're not going to hurt anybody ever again? Can I get justice with a non-capital offense? One of you is writing a paper on the effects that the death penalty has on the family members, both of the victims and the offender. It's that's what it is. It's the effects, you know. When you succumb to emotion and you succumb to your feelings. You have a greater likelihood of getting rid of all reason, all logic, all science. Granted, there are occasions when the entire community is enraged. The entire community is upset, and they don't understand why you're not. Why don't you want his head on the platter? What good will it do? Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Is there an event that occurred in the last year or 18 months that inflamed the emotion of the entire community, the entire nation? And was the response to that event emotional, without reason, without logic? And if anybody sat back and said, hold on, wait a second, were they attacked? Which event am I talking about? George Floyd. Is police brutality an issue in the United States? Yes, it is. Cops will use excessive force for one of two reasons: lack of training and fear. What Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd had nothing to do with training, and it had nothing to do with fear. What George Floyd did was about indifference, and he just didn't care. That's why he belongs in prison. But that event turned everything into an emotional response. And if you didn't agree with that emotional response, then you got attacked as a racist. I asked a question, and I'll ask it here. Do you really want to use George Floyd as your poster child to fight against law enforcement abuse? Oh, what's her name? Young African-American lady, 1960s, rode on the front seat of the bus. Rosa Parks, thank you. Rosa Parks was a poster child for equality, right? To do away with the segregation, especially on the buses. Was Rosa Parks the first choice of Martin Luther King Jr.? Was Rosa Parks the first time that this was attempted? No. Why did they choose Rosa Parks to be the poster child or the face of reforming and getting rid of segregation? What did Rosa Parks do for a living? Nobody knows what Rosa Parks, I couldn't even remember her name, so. Rosa Parks was a maid. She was a house servant. She had no criminal record. She'd never gotten into trouble. Never had a problem. So when she sits down in the seat on the bus and they try to remove her and she says no, does the establishment that's trying to enforce segregation have anything to stand on? Rosa Parks is pure. She is a saint. What do we know about George Floyd, as horrible as it was, the way that he died? What do we know about George Floyd? He was on parole at the time. He spent 9 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for aggravated kidnapping and attempted murder. He kidnapped a pregnant white woman, held a gun to her belly, said, if you don't do what I want, I will kill your child. He had a severe drug problem. He had a fentanyl problem. He'd already overdosed twice on fentanyl and almost died. Is this the guy that you want to hang civil rights on? Or would you want to find somebody else? Somebody that wasn't doing anything wrong at the time that the cops killed him. Like, like Breonna Taylor. She would have been a much better poster child for the defund the police movement. Or even Eric Gardner. What was Eric Gardner doing? When Eric Gardner was killed by the police, what was he doing? How was Eric Gardner killed? You looking him up, Josh? Who's Eric Gardner? He was killed by the NYPD. He was choked to death by the NYPD. What was he doing at the time? Granted, it's a misdemeanor. It's against the law to do what he was doing. He was selling what's called Lucy's. A Lucy is a single cigarette. He would go to New Jersey and he would buy 2 or 3 cartons of cigarettes for $30 each. And then he'd come to New York and he would sell them 1 cigarette at a time for $1. Did he make some money? Yes, he did. But was it cheaper for the New Yorkers to buy cigarettes from Eric Gardner than it was to go to 7-Eleven in New York City to buy some cigarettes? Yes, after the taxes, a single pack of cigarettes in New York City is $13.50. And he's selling them for $1 a piece. So that's still going to give him $20 a pack. He's making a killing. But it's illegal, so the cops went and confronted him. Eric Gardner, I think he stood 6'5", 6'6", 335 pounds. He was huge. And when the cops gave him a command, he didn't follow through. So this short little, small little cop, about the size of Antonio here, jumps on Eric Gardner's back, puts him in a chokehold, and takes him to the ground and kills him. I think I would rather use Eric Gardner as my poster child for police abuse. Because what did he do? Did he have a criminal history? Yes, for selling Lucy. Much better guy. But when they protested and they fought over Eric Gardner, what happened? What changes came to our country after Eric Gardner? Freddie Gregg, Trayvon Martin. I could go on and on and on and on with the list of African Americans that have ended up dead at the hands of police. And this is something that Packer says, and I found it interesting. We use the emotion to get everybody churned up. But what does that, in the end of the day, what does that do? Does it help the cause? When you burn down your community, when you protest and you destroy the community because you're upset about a practice that the government's participating in, is it beneficial? No, it's not. Because you have lost all attachment to reason and logic. All of it. And once you lose reason and logic, you've lost the high ground. You've lost the ability to make any changes. The 2020 Uniform Crime Report was released yesterday. Any of you read it? Federal. The Federal Uniform Crime Report that's published every year by the FBI was released yesterday. And the most startling statistic is that murder has increased by 30% from 2019 to 2020. We have 30% more people killed in 2020 than we did in 2019. What's the difference? What changed? Less cops. Because of the defund police movement, cops quit, cops stopped going to work, which allowed the criminals to take over the community. Because we let emotion take over, and we didn't follow reason. And when you're seeking revenge, Sun Tzu has a piece of advice for you. If you're going after somebody to seek revenge, dig 2 graves. One for them, one for you. Because if you're seeking revenge, that's how you're going to die. There's another proverb. Live by the sword, die by the sword. Do not let your emotions take you over, especially in this world, especially in our profession as criminal justice professionals. You have to, you've heard people say, geez, he is just so cold and heartless. He has no compassion. How can cops have compassion? How can they show their emotion? Because if I was to show emotion and react to everything that I have seen in my lifetime as an investigator, I'd probably be on death row myself as a serial killer. I won't be able to sleep at night. Oh, I don't sleep at night. Okay, so that's why cops seem cold. That's why they seem like they're heartless and they have no compassion and their jokes are just disturbing. Grossly disturbing. The gallows humor that you hear from cops, correctional officers, probation officers is disgusting. If I wasn't recording, I'd share one with you. But I'm recording. And I don't want it to end up on YouTube. So, religion. With few exceptions, leadership of most of the organized religions in the United States, whether they're Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, they openly favor the abolition of capital punishment. That doesn't sound right, does it? Because what does our religion say? Well, before we get there, most of Americans, 75% of Americans, and a Gallup poll from just 6 months ago, 75% of Americans still favor the death penalty, even though every major religion in this country, the leadership of every religion in this country opposes the death penalty and thinks that we should get rid of the death penalty and come up with something else. Why do we have such a disconnect between the religious leadership and the people? I know my rabbi and I have this fight all the time. over the death penalty. His stance is the death penalty does away with emotion. No, excuse me, it does away with logic. The death penalty is only about emotion. I'll say, but Rabbi, you teach Torah. Yes, I do, son. I go, but Rabbi, Torah says death. He goes, yes, I know, but you don't understand. The death penalty has to be applied with reason and logic and without emotion. Do you think we can have that in this country? Do you think that we could just sit back as a society, as a group of people, as 12 people sitting in a jury box? Do you think that we can rationally come to a decision to end somebody's life? Do you think you could end somebody's life based on reason and logic and not emotion or vengeance? So, religions that support capital punishment include the American Baptist Convention, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Church of Jesus Christ, the Latter-day Saints. If you don't know who that is, that's the Mormon Church. And conservative and Orthodox Jewish groups. My rabbi is a Reformed Jew. He doesn't like it when I call him. He says, you're not doing that a Christian. He goes, Christians believe in Jesus. I said, yeah. And you? I don't. I said, Christians don't follow Torah, and neither do you. Because Torah says this. That's where you're going to find your Orthodox and Jewish groups, Orthodox and some conservative Jewish groups. The rest of religiondom, is that a good word? The rest of the faith community seek or want or desire to abolish the death penalty. So, the Old Testament, also known as Torah. It's the first 5 books of your Christian Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. These books prescribe the death penalty for many offenses, and it provides scriptural support for the death penalty. However, Hebrew law made it difficult to execute. And it also provides rules and scriptures to not allow the death penalty. One of the things that must be required is that in order to receive the death penalty, you have to have 2 witnesses against you. And both of those witnesses have to agree upon every aspect of the crime. You have to be brought before a council of judges for the town at the city gate. Even though the prescription in the Old Testament says it must be the death penalty and you must execute this person, there's every once in a while within the scripture it talks about grace, it talks about compassion, it talks about making things right. There's also a whole aspect about the cities of refuge within the Old Testament. If you kill somebody in the Old Testament and you can make it to the city of refuge, you cannot be executed. They can't chase you down. You get to live in the city of refuge for eternity, or at least for the rest of your life. Granted, if you leave the city, guess what? All bets are off, and outlaw justice they can come kill you. The blood feud, the blood right, they can come execute you if you ever leave the city. What's this sound like? Does it sound like a precursor to a modern day prison? You kill somebody, you can go to prison. As long as you stay in prison, you're fine. The New Testament. Many references against the death penalty exist. Capital punishment is not only widely used in the Middle Ages under the Catholic Church for a lot of religious crimes, but if you read the New Testament, Jesus is sitting at the well, or he's sitting at a well. He's leaning up against the well and he's resting for the day. And the rabbi and the men of the community bring this, Scripture says whore, this harlot, this prostitute, before Jesus and says, this woman has been caught committing adultery and fornication. She should be put to death. What was Jesus' response according to the New Testament? You guys know? Josh knows. According to the Scripture, it says that he started writing in the dirt, in the ground. Nobody knows what he was writing. I think he was writing the people's names of the guys that were there. And he said, his response, his reply, was, he who has no sin, cast the first stone. And all these guys up and left. I'm kind of thinking, and this is just my thought, that all of those guys that were trying to get her executed, one or two of them got caught by their wives. And they wanted to have her executed. And what he was doing was he was writing the names of all the men in the town that had had sex with this woman. And they were in the crowd calling for her to be killed. And then he said, you who have not this sin, cast the first stone. And then they looked up and all the people were gone. And Jesus said to the woman, where are your accusers? If there are no accusers, I will not condemn you. Go, live long and prosper. No, that's not, that was Spock. Go and sin no more. Live long and prosper is another Hebrew proverb blessing that Spock stole. So there's a lot of conjecture on when, based on religion, on when somebody should be executed or when they should not be executed. Any thoughts? Before we move on to the next topic, are there any thoughts about what we just covered? So next Monday, you guys need to practice. Next Monday, I'm going to have a tenured professor come in here to watch me. And my greatest problem, the greatest thing that I get written out for the most, is that there's not enough student participation. So please help me get a good grade next Monday. When I ask a question, answer me. Participate in the discussion.
Even if we're grossly wrong.
I didn't hear you.
Even if we're grossly wrong, wants to shut up.
Even if you roast me, that's fine.
We were grossly wrong.
Yes. Even if you're grossly wrong, I'll correct you properly and respectfully. It'll come with, thanks for playing. So let's move on to arbitrariness. And discrimination of the administration of the death penalty. If you guys read, I know that you guys read because I've told you to read Furman versus Georgia. One of the judges that wrote in their decision about the death penalty. He wrote that because it's arbitrary and barbaric, the death penalty as it is currently practiced is unconstitutional. So what does arbitrariness mean? Without consistency. It involves the question of whether discretion permits the death penalty to be applied randomly, capriciously, irregularly, or disproportionately among qualified defendants without any regard to legal criteria. Or like Jacob said, it's random. There is no rhyme nor reason to why one person gets the death penalty and another person doesn't. We still see it a little bit today, right? Some people will get life in prison. Some people get life in prison without parole. And some people will get the death penalty. And they've all committed the same exact crime. Sometimes, on occasion, these three defendants were involved in the same exact crime, and they still get different levels of punishment. Like the gay bashing case I shared that I went to the execution of, where two guys kidnapped a homosexual man out of Huntsville, out of Waco, and they took him up to Tyler, where they tortured him and executed him. And the quote was, "Friday night lights, Saturday night gay bash." And that's what was in the testimony. One of the guys, the victim, asked these two guys, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to me?" And the response was, "Friday night lights," referring to what? High school football. God, Saturday night gay bash. Apparently they don't go to college football. Not as important today. Well, they're from Waco. Baylor. Who cares about the Baylor Bears? The one guy got life in prison with parole after 30 years. And then the other, who he testified against, got the death penalty. How's that fair? How is that justice? Is it justice? Let this be known, if you ever decide to go commit a crime with a friend of yours, he who sings first gets the better deal. The canary gets the better deal. And don't think that your friend, your wife, your best buddy is not going to say anything. Because when the cop says, "You help me out, I'll help you out." You don't want to go to death row, do you? Send Dallas to death row. Because you know what Dallas is doing in the other room, right? Dallas is singing like a canary. What's Dallas really doing? I don't know anything you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And then you're over here just throwing Dallas under the bus. Or in this case, throwing him on the gurney. Okay. It's just the way that it is. So the evidence of the arbitrary application, post-Furman v. Georgia, is that a small percentage of death-eligible offenders are ever executed. So what they did was they looked at all of the death eligible crimes that were committed in the United States from 1972 to 2016, 2015. They looked at every single crime that was death eligible. And then looked at the percentage of how many of them actually received the death penalty. The court said that the death penalty should be rare and rarely used. You might need to know which justice said that. So you look at the patterns of the application across the jurisdictions and over time to come up with your events. And I did give you a wrong date. It's since 1930 through 2015. And of all of the death eligible offenders that were executed since 1930, only 2% actually received the death penalty. So if Texas has 200 people on death row, how many death eligible crimes were committed in Texas so that it didn't go to the row? 20,000. 2%. So it'd be 200,000.
40,000.
Yeah, I know. I hate math.
200.
Yeah, 10,000. Yeah. 10,000 death eligible crimes. Only 2% ended up on the row. Is that rare? Does that make it rare? Does it make it arbitrary? So what you want to do is you want to look at the reasons, or what was the common thread that caused these 2% of people to end up on the row. And we found that there was no meaningful way to distinguish between eligible offenders who were executed and who were not. If there is absolutely no links even during the high point of executions in the 1930s, only 20% of the death eligible offenders were executed. And we saw, what was the greatest number of executions? Which year was that? (1930). Okay, not much changed since post-Furman. Even though things changed, even though Furman said that it's arbitrary, things still haven't changed at all. Since 1998, or as of April 1st, 1998, 40 jurisdictions with the death penalty, 29 have executed at least one person under post-Furman statutes. And who has the express lane to the death house? Who's executed more people? Which state has executed more people than any other state in the country? Texas. We are number one in everything. Wouldn't kill it. Pure numbers. Pure numbers. California has the most people on death row, followed by Ohio. California and Ohio never execute anybody. Southern states are executing all the time, and Texas is in the lead. 60% of executing jurisdictions have executed fewer than 10 people since 1977. Texas executed 10 people in 2019. I think they have 13 scheduled for this year. 8 states account for 80% of all executions year to year. And that includes Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida. You know, Florida's slowing down. Three states account for 54% of the executions, Texas, Virginia, and Florida. And Texas accounts for 1/3 of all executions. But even still, it's just a small percentage of those that are eligible for the death penalty. %75% of post-Furman executions are in the South. In those states that are known as being Confederate states. Or better yet, if you look at the anti-vaccine mandate states, they're the same states that have a high number of executions. So it's all of the South. And you take the Texas Panhandle and go north, 10 Canadian border. Those are the states that have the most executions. Three and 3/4 times more, 3 3/4 times more than any other region. So there are 6 sources of arbitrary application within or of the post-Furman and post-Furman statutes that justify arbitrariness is a juror's misunderstanding or underestimating their sentencing obligations, rule changes by the United States, problems in determining murderous intent, I think some of you are writing them down. I'll pause and I'll breathe. You know when we're caught up. And there you go. I'm like, oh my God, my hand hurts. So if, and I'll ask a question before we go to the next slide. But if the death penalty was ruled unconstitutional because it was arbitrary and racist or discriminatory, why are we still finding an arbitrary factor within our death penalty even after Furman? If we're still finding that the death penalty is arbitrary and barbaric in its application, would it still be considered unconstitutional? Or should it still be considered unconstitutional? Can't execute under 18. You can't execute mentally handicapped. You can't, we're going to be covering all of these here in the next weeks. We might even go back to the original slideshow that we were doing. The availability and use of plea bargaining. And this is probably the plea bargain is the biggest event to happen to the death penalty, because you cannot plea bargain a death penalty. If the DA wants to execute you, he has to go to court, he has to go to trial. He has to have a jury of 12 find you guilty. He has to prove the aggravating circumstances over the mitigating circumstances. And in Texas, the jury has to answer those 3 questions correctly in order for an individual to be sentenced to die. If the bad guy, if the offender wants to avoid the death penalty, what's he do? He pleads guilty. I'm guilty. Now death penalty is off the table. And this is what we find, and this is what's Michelle's last name? Not Obama. Michelle. There's a book called The New Jim Crow. A really good book. But in it, she talks about how the plea bargain has done more to destroy the African American family than anything else in the history of our world. But the plea bargain has also turned the death penalty into something that's arbitrary. Because if you plead guilty, you're not going to die. And most people, regardless of the crime, is going to look and they want to find the easiest way to get through the problem that they're now suffering. So a plea bargain, if you go ahead and plead guilty, you'll get 15 years, you'll be out in 4, or you'll be out in 5. But if you make this go to trial, you're going to go to prison for the rest of your life. What are you going to do? Honey, I'll be back in 5 years. Darling, it's been a long time. It's only been 5 years. It could have been life. It could have been never again. So the plea bargain has become one of the worst tools within the criminal justice belt because it does away with justice. And then the appellate courts. Told you guys about that article about the Midland guy on death row. Did you read it? I told you to be ready to discuss it today. Why was he taken off death row? One of the prosecutors is working for the judge. Is that a bad thing? Yes. And what is the 3 words that make it a bad thing? Conflict of interest. It's a moral turpitude violation. It gives the appearance of impropriety. Now, this prosecutor may not have done anything wrong when it came to this case, but there is a perception of impropriety. So the guy gets off of death row and he's now sitting in the Midland County Jail while the DA tries to figure out what they're going to do next. So we might have a guy who, since 2001, has been saying, I did nothing wrong. I didn't violate the law. I didn't break the law. I'm innocent. It was the guy that you had testify against me that did all of this. He gets a new trial. Any predictions on what will happen to him? Or do you think the DA is going to just say, you know what, 20 years in prison is long enough, have a nice day? The latter? How much do you, if that happens, he's probably going to need to get him to agree to a plea bargain. To plead guilty to something. Conspiracy. So this way, or an Alfred plea, so they can't turn around and sue them for wrongful imprisonment for 20 years. Huh? He's going to have to plead guilty or we're going to have a new trial. Because once he pleads guilty, you can't appeal that. If you plead guilty, you can't appeal it unless you can prove that you were coerced into pleading guilty. So the appellate courts change and they overturn a lot of death penalty sentences, which makes it arbitrary. Discrimination. Somebody define discrimination for me. Yes. In the short words. And the long words is that an individual is disproportionately punished against certain qualified defendants, not because of their crimes, but because they belong to a particular class or group of people. And this action is deliberate. So if you get 12 angry men, we get a jury that's filled with 12 neo-Nazis. And the defendant on the stand is an educated academic Jew. Is your decision going to become discriminatory? Will it be deliberate? Granted, you could take the educated Jew and put any other racial or ethnic group you want into that spot. If the punishment assigned is deliberate and it is because of their subgroup that they belong to, as opposed to the classifications and qualifications of the crime. Let's use John Michael Hayes. Does anybody know who John Michael Hayes is? That name sound familiar to anybody? Sounds familiar because I've told this story once or twice. John Michael Hayes was the leader of the Aryan Circle out of Big Spring. His available sentence was 20 years to life without the possibility of parole. The jury was composed of 6 whites, 4 Hispanics, and 2 African Americans. What do you think his sentence was? Do you guys remember what his sentence was? They sentenced him to 99 years in prison. He'll be eligible for parole after 60 years. He was already 55. Is he getting out of prison? Why was he given such a stern sentence? Because of his association with the Aryan Circle. Does anybody care? Does anybody care that a white supremacist received a 99-year sentence for killing another white supremacist? Nobody cares. Why don't we care? Huh? He's not part of the protected class? But how is it different? Justice is blind. Justice shouldn't be seeing your skin color or any particular class or group of people. If you judge somebody and you send them to prison because of who they are or the associations that they have, you're being discriminatory. Granted, Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow, and the way that we look at this, if you are sentencing I hate this acronym, so I'm going to spell it out, a Black indigenous person of color, if you sentence them to 99 years when they're 55 years old, would somebody care? Would people care? Let's say George Floyd, hypothetically, let's say George Floyd survived the Derek Chauvin chokehold. Knee to the back of the neck hold, which I have applied several times. for 40 and 50 minutes, and my bad guy never died. I wonder why. I know why. Because I was on his shoulders, not his neck. And I kept asking him, "Are you okay? Somebody will be here to hook you up here in a minute. You just lay there. All will be okay." What if what if George Floyd was for passing counterfeit money? What if he was sentenced to 50 years in prison? Do you think that would fit this? That he was being punished because he was a particular class or group of people? I think so, and I think it would be wrong. How many African Americans are sentenced to prison for extended periods of time because they're African Americans? How many Hispanics are sent to prison for a lot longer than they should be because they're Hispanic? This book, The New Jim Crow, breaks down all the statistics. I think I've broke those statistics down in this class, right? Yes, sir.
No, they did give him an extended thing, sentencing based on the race. How would you base, or how would they find the intent and put it to that step?
They would do this, and the way they do this is they will take 65, 100 cases. We'll take 100 cases of the same exact offense. Let's use aggravated sexual assault, because everybody loves rape, right? So they will take 100 cases that where the perpetrator was white, 100 cases where the perpetrator was black, 100 cases where the perpetrator was Hispanic, and 100 cases of other. Asian, Jewish, Native American, whatever. They will look at the case, and they'll look at the conditions of the case, and they'll look at the facts of the case. And if they're all similar, should everybody get the same sentence? If this is not arbitrary and it's not discriminatory, everybody should get the same sentence. But what we find is that the African American population ends up getting a sentence of at least 50% more than the white guys doing the same thing. Hispanics are getting a sentence 30% longer than the white guys doing the same thing. What I'd like to see, how long was Derek Chauvin sentenced to prison? Grand total of 40 years between the three different charges, and the judge stacked them, which means he has to finish this charge. Then he starts time for the next charge. Then he starts time for the next charge. They're not consecutive. I didn't hear you. He's trying to appeal it, but he's going to be sitting in prison for almost 40 years. What if we take those three charges and those three crimes and apply them to black cops or Hispanic cops and the punishments that they get? What do you think we'd find? We can hypothesize that the African American or even the Hispanic police officer is going to end up in prison for life. If the book by Michelle, what's her name, and New Jim Crow is correct, I got to come up with her last name. You guys got to forgive me. It's 3:14. Hurry up. I'm running out of time. Michelle Alexander. Go find her book. I have it in my personal library. Go read this book. It'll be a lot of interest to you. We will pick up with discrimination on Wednesday. Questions, comments, or concerns? Have a good day.